On very different ends of the world, it was yet another failure for two persistent hunters. In a typical suburban household, a cat named Tom had yet again lost to his rival, a mouse named Jerry, with an elaborate trap that blew up the entire building and launched him into the horizon. Meanwhile, on a cruise ship out at sea, a hungry hyena named Zig and his hermit crab sidekick Bernie were intercepted once more from their plans to eat a mermaid, getting rocketed away by a giant sharky fist. The two predators eventually collided in the air, causing them both to plummet down to a foreign bar. There, they began exchanging their experiences and lack of luck in capturing their prey. But things took a sour turn when the house cat suggested that the hyena had it easier compared to him, even suggesting that the bulldog Spike was worse to deal with than Sharko. Before a fight could break out, Bernie stepped between the cat and the hyena, wagering a bet between them. He proposed that they would swap places, with Tom trying to claim Marina for Zig, while Zig would attempt to catch Jerry for Tom. And whoever was successful first would get bragging rights, as well as the larger cut of the meal. With the bet in place, Tom set out for a cruise that was bound to be anything but relaxing, and Zig and Bernie made their way to the suburbs, with their newfound rivals being none the wiser of the situation. Neither of them really knew how they were going to succeed, but once they got there, they started putting together a plan of action that would be foolproof. Except, knowing these two, it really wouldn't.
Larry Winwood here, and I'm wearing a cat hoodie. I guess you could say I'm not very satisfied with this episode so far. Alright, now that I got the stupid inside joke out of the way. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the guy who animated Donald vs. Daffy for Multiverse Match, and maybe a few other matches to come, hint hint nudge nudge. But today is a little different. I'm here to debate for one of my favorite cartoons of all time, Tom and Jerry, and discuss why Tom will have a higher chance of outsmarting Sharko and stealing Marina than Zig against Jerry. Before I get into Tom and Zig specifically, let's look at who they're trying to capture. Jerry's iconic for outsmarting people who are trying to catch him. Not only has he outsmarted Thomas multiple times, but he's also escaped other cats like Butch, humans, dogs, other predators like lions and bulls, to even weirder stuff like aliens, mummies, and witches. I'm pretty sure a not-so-bright hyena won't be too much trouble. Marina, on the other hand, is much more childless and naive to the point where she can easily get fooled by new things like candy, dogs, and trampolines. Heck, she was even tricked into going inside a cannon before by Zig. If someone like Zig, a person who has made it pretty obvious that he wants to eat her whole, can trick her, I'm pretty sure Tom can too. It's mostly Sharko that's the issue here, but as soon as he's taken care of, Marina is basically as good as captured. While if Spike is taken care of, at least Joe would be more capable of defending himself. Heck, we even seen multiple times that Jerry is capable of fighting back if necessary, being able to beat up Tom multiple times by either smashing his face in with furniture or just beating the heck out of him like he did when Tom hurt Nibbles. I won't deny that there are some moments where Marina has defended herself, but more often than not, she's already halfway into Zig's mouth and just doesn't do anything about it. Moving from prey to the predators, Tom is much smarter than Zig is. Tom and Jerry have shown to have a much more even rivalry than Zig and Sharko. Every time Zig tries something, he immediately gets thwarted almost effortlessly by Sharko, multiple times in a single episode. Tom, on the other hand, has shown to put up a solid fight throughout the whole episode and even gets the upper hand and defeats Jerry sometimes. So Tom's track record is already much better than Zig's. You can argue that Bernie would have the intelligence to match Tom, but not only does Tom have more experience than this than Bernie and Zig do, but also Zig is known for always messing up Bernie's plans. Tom would also have the experience in dealing with people like Sharko. Sharko is known for always trying to impress Marina with his muscles and masculinity, usually to no avail, and Tom has experience dealing with those type of beach muscle men, using their ego to distract them, most notably in the episode Beach Bully Bingo, where he tricks Butch and Spike to fight and compete against each other in order to distract them while he and Jerry enjoy the beach. He could find someone to compete against Sharko like Bigfoot or King Neptune and steal Marina away while he's distracted with that. It also helps that Sharko is always known for sleeping on the job, so Tom could easily sneak past the sleeping brute in order to catch himself a green fish-tailed sea creature. Now where have I heard that before? Tom would also be more than capable of escaping Sharko if necessary, being that he's outsmarted sharks trying to eat him before, fighting back, beating him up, and even once turning a shark into canned shark meat before, so Sharko would be no different. I mean, Tom has faced his fair share of punishment multiple times before, getting beaten up, chewed up, burned, frozen, and torn to shreds, so he'll definitely be fine. While on the flip side, I don't see Zig doing too well against Spike. Zig is such a pushover. He's constantly getting beaten up by Sharko and never really fights back. He kinda just sits there and takes the punishment most of the time. He's basically a giggling punching bag. Tom at least has been shown to be very skilled at outrunning people wanting to beat him up. Sometimes he's even been shown to be able to fight on par with that of Spike, showing that he's more than capable of fighting back if need be, especially if we include his experience as a musketeer, judo master, wrestler, and a kung fu master. Tom could also take advantage of his feline traits in order to captivate Marina, being that she loves animals like dogs, maggots, small cute fish, even once making Sharko wear a catsuit before, so he can lure Marina away by pulling or whatever. And since Sharko is pretty much a huge simp like Adam is, this may be a good way to get on Sharko's good side, being that A, Marina, someone who he wants to date, loves this cat, and B, has also shown to have a soft spot for pets, like when he turned Zig into his pet dog. Actually, what if being around Thomas helps flip that switch in his brain, turning him back into a cat? Then he'll just be meowing around and pouncing random people while Tom steals Marina away. I guess that can work too. So in the end, Zig will be far too much out of his league facing a brood like Spike as well as someone as experienced and as clever as Jerry, while Tom would be more than capable of exploiting Marina's naivety and trigger right into his hands, while being able to maneuver around and distract Sharko. Looks like Tom would be feline fine, as Zig will soon be carrying the weight of shame on his back.
Give me power.
Oh yeah, baby, Zig and Sharko time. I finally got an opportunity to talk about this series. Never thought I'd see the day. Although I guess realistically speaking, neither of these two would actually succeed given their track records. But I've still gotta make a case for Ziggy Boy, and lucky for me, I think his chances of pulling this off are way better. So I think there are two pretty obvious points of contention to make against Tom here. Who he's hunting now, and who he's going through to hunt her. Starting with the former, Tom is more used to hunting small critters that physically can't really fight back against him. Not just Jerry, but canaries, ducklings, goldfish, you know, typical house cat prey. Compare that to Marina, who is clearly not a small critter, but a human-sized mermaid. Just from that alone, Tom is going to have to change up his strategies, and for the worse since we typically see him struggling against larger targets. I don't think a mousetrap is going to cut it in this case. You may think that may not matter, since in those cases they're clearly a lot tougher than him, but Marina showed she can be quite a powerhouse when she wants to be. There's even been quite a few occasions where she's beaten up Zig herself. And while these instances are few and far between, it still stands to reason that she could probably just kick Tom's ass without Sharko's help. But don't worry, we'll get to him. Meanwhile, in the first season, we see Zig successfully trapping smaller animals. Though granted, it's just to use their assets for his plans to get Marina, because apparently all starving predators in cartoons are super short-sighted. I will admit this isn't one-to-one since Jerry's a lot more clever than the background characters on Zig and Sharko, but you know who else is pretty clever? Zig's sidekick Bernie. That little crab's been on Zig's side since day one, and he's clearly the brains of the operation, usually being the one to come up with most of the plans to get Marina. And I think he'd be a huge help here since Jerry has befriended a lot of other small animals that are also trying to evade Tom. Bernie could just use that to his advantage to lure Jerry into a trap. He's already come up with a lot of plans that came pretty close to actually working, and on top of that, even escaped captivity and outsmarted an alien with his own tech. So I think it's safe to say that Bernie is decently smarter than Jerry. I don't remember Tom having any sort of sidekick unless you want to count that one kitten he tried to teach, but I don't think he'd be that much of a help. But of course I'm saying all this without addressing the great white shark in the room. Zig may have to put up with Spike occasionally, but Sharko is pretty much never far away from Marina, always there to protect her. And to put it as nicely as possible, Tom stands absolutely, positively zero chance whatsoever against him. Whenever he's on the wrong side of someone clearly stronger than him, whether it be Spike, lions, a baby elephant, or whatever, Tom never does well against them. And Sharko easily blows all of them out of the water in strength and toon force. I know we generally equalize stats for these debates, but it's hard to ignore that Sharko has insane feats of strength like lifting the entire island, or playing paddleball with the moon, or traveling to the Arctic and back to his tropical island in just a matter of seconds. None of the brutes in Tom and Jerry have anything remotely close to that, and I think Tom is definitely going to be missing Spike when it comes to comparing them. And speaking of which, I know the same can easily be said for the Zig versus Spike matchup, but the difference is Spike's not always by Jerry's side. Sure, they are generally shown to be friends, and there was that one short where he protected Jerry because he owed him a favor, but aside from that, he usually only goes after Tom when he's provoked by him specifically, not because he's protecting the mouse. Which of course isn't to say he wouldn't get involved here, but even if he does, I already said Spike doesn't really compare to Sharko's insane feats. And since Zig regularly takes abuse from Sharko, whatever punishment Spike dishes out probably won't be as bad in comparison. Now, I've done a lot of talking about everyone in this scenario except for the main mouse himself, so I guess I'll get into that. Jerry is 100% smarter than Zig, that much I can agree with, and he's definitely capable of defending himself. but that doesn't mean he's got a flawless record. There have been plenty of times where he's been caught by Tom and only escaped through another interference. At least way more times than Sharko has failed to stop Marina from becoming a snack. More than she already is, who said that. Sure, in general, Jerry may be able to outwit him, but it goes to show that he's not perfect either. And there's a decent chance he might actually underestimate Zig due to his stupidity. In which case, that could easily lead him open to a trap. Like I mentioned earlier, with Bernie getting on his good side, or any of the more outlandish plans Zig has tried compared to Tom. And aside from a lot of the points I brought up earlier, I think Zig is straight up a lot more persistent than Tom is. At the very least, he's shown to take a lot more abuse in one episode than Tom does in 5, before calling it quits for now. I think there's a good chance Zig would be able to tough through whatever Jerry throws at him and eventually tire him out. After all, the greater Toon Force argument I made for Sharko also applies to Zig, who regularly takes punishment like this on a daily basis, meaning he's got a lot more dexterity on his side than the average character in Tom and Jerry. With that, those are my main points I got for the Hungry Hungry Hyena. And now Larry has to rebuttal? Now there's something to laugh at.
Don't you believe it? Yes, Tom is known for mostly going after smaller creatures like mice, fish, and ducklings. But there are plenty of other moments where he goes after much bigger targets, like dragons, Bigfoot, horses, lions, etc. Sure, I admit most of the time things don't go exactly according to plan, but that's mostly due to Jerry butting into Tom's business and helping those creatures out. And besides, like I said, it's not like Moina would be too hard to catch with how easy it is to trick her and grab her when she barely ever fights back. Also, you think Bernie is smarter than Jerry? Yeah, I don't think so. Sure, Bernie outsmarted an alien with his tech before. And both Tom and Jerry were able to stop an entire alien invasion before, and Tom and Jerry blast off to Mars. Tom is also shown to be an intelligent planner and inventor as well. He once made a working computer with nothing more than scrap and junk, and was even able to make a working space shuttle that was able to take him to the moon all by himself. Not to mention Tom and Jerry's experience in more futuristic episodes, like Advance and Be Mechanized or Oh Solo Meow, where they operate multiple different gadgets, machines, and even entire space stations. I am positive that both Tom and Jerry are smarter than Bernie, and especially Zig. On the topic of Bernie, you think that Bernie would be able to trick Jerry by being his friend since Jerry always befriends smaller creatures. But there are episodes where Jerry does face against people his size, like in the episode where he and Tom goes after Cracker, or when he has his own cat and mouse chase against an ant that's stealing his picnic. This shows that Jerry may not always be as friendly to people, even if they are his size. Plus, Jerry has a pretty shaky history with crabs anyways. You think that Tom wouldn't have any help in his mission against Sharko, but that is also false. If he needs it, he can always call his partner in crime Butch, and maybe even the other alley cats in order to help him out. With that big of a numbers advantage, he could have some of the cats take the bullet and let them get beaten up by Sharko, or he grabs Moina and takes her away. Speaking of beatings, you bring up Sharko's more absurd feats like him being able to push the moon or lift the island, but I don't think that's too big of an issue. Not only are stats for this debate equalized for the most part, but even without that, Tom is used to taking his beatings and regenerating from it thanks to his Toon Force. He also has his own fair share of cosmic feats, like the time his body was durable enough to channel enough electricity to destroy a meteor that would destroy the Earth, or that time he became a constellation. I'm pretty sure Tom would be fine. As for Zig vs Spike, sure, Spike isn't known to be around or protect Jerry 24/7 like Sharko does for Moina, but that doesn't mean Zig won't have to deal with him. Spike is a guard dog. His job is to guard the house while his family is away. If he sees a wild hyena trying to break into his house, I'm pretty sure Zig will be turned into a pretzel. And even if Spike isn't around, Jerry has plenty of other people who will help him out, like Nibbles or Crackers, and can even call his cousin Muscles, who would be more than willing to beat the ever-loving crap out of Zig. While Sharko has no other consistent allies who can help him out, meaning that once he's taken care of, Tom and Zig will be downing on Mermaid Tail. When comparing track records, yes, Jerry has lost more time than Sharko has, but this is more showing that Tom is smart rather than Jerry is dumb. Like I said, Tom and Jerry have a much more even rivalry than Zig and Sharko. This is shown the many times they work together, being both equally as skilled at manipulating and tricking others, both even working as detectives before, solving multiple mysteries and crimes together. While again, Zig and Sharko confrontations are so one-sided, Sharko beating up Zig is literally the daily routine. Also, did I hear that right? Tom is more likely to get him than Zig? Adam, buddy, pal, chum, amigo, friend of mine. Tom and Jerry have been doing this song and dance for about 81 years. If anything, Tom doesn't know when to give up. Not to mention that since this is a competition to see who is better, that'll give Thomas even more reason to not give up so easily, thanks to how egotistical and competitive he can be at times. You bring up Zig's experience in catching small creatures, but even you state that Jerry is much smarter than those creatures. It's gonna take a lot more than just grabbing him to get him, and I just don't think Zig has any real useful methods that could trap Jerry for long. Mouse traps, useless. Bear traps, meh. Guns, yeah right. Heck, even skipping the evil laugh and eating him immediately wouldn't work, being that he could escape through his ears or nose, or just smash his teeth into pieces. I'm so sorry, Adam. I know this is what everyone and their mothers want as Zig W, but this just isn't it. I believe both Tom and Jerry are far too crafty and manipulative for Sharko and Zig to handle respectively, and Marina is just as good as caught. Also, if you make one more thirsty Marina comment, you are out of this house. O-U-T out.
Gee, I'm throwing away $1 million.
But I'm happy! Yes!
Not funny, Larold. Didn't laugh. First off, you bring up that Tom has gone up against larger targets. How many of those have turned out well in his favor again? Yeah, that's what I thought. I do believe Tom would easily be able to trick Marina given how oblivious she generally is, but that doesn't change the fact that he'd still have to go through Sharko to be successful with these tricks in the first place. I'll get to your arguments about Tom simply being able to do that in a bit, but let's assume that he somehow does. We've seen a handful of times that Marina is also willing to go out of her way on the offense whenever Sharko is the one in danger, or if something leaves him distressed, even when he was a major douchebag beforehand like in the tennis episode. And in these instances, she's shown to be pretty capable and crafty in her own right. So ironically, getting rid of Sharko would probably just make her harder to capture while she's frantically trying to fight him and giving Tom a good beating in the process. Also, Tom is definitely a lot more clever than Zig is, that much is just a fact. But I think you're selling Sharko's intelligence short here. Not to say it's impossible for Tom to outwit him, but he's always the first to see through Zig's schemes, even when he fools literally everyone else around him. And even though he's not the brightest, seeing Marina in danger is all it takes for him to go on the attack. So Tom's tricks would only last so long before he realizes something's up. I also don't see him being that easily fooled by Tom, because Marina still sees Zig as a friend, yet doesn't hesitate to beat him up right in front of her. The second he suspects Tom is up to no good, he's not going to be pulling any punches. You also bring up that Tom has escaped and even beaten up sharks, but those sharks aren't anything like Sharko. They were confined to the water, whereas Sharko doesn't have that evolutionary disadvantage. And I don't recall them pulling off insane feats of strength like kicking Zig out of the atmosphere. Even then, Tom really wasn't a match for them at all. One of those instances he only survived because Jerry decided to save his ass. Also, the cat switch thing was from someone accidentally flipping it, not by being around a cat. And again, seeing Zig about to eat Marina was enough for him to snap out of it. So even if Tom somehow knows to take advantage of that, it probably won't last long enough for him to do anything to Marina either. I do also agree that Zig isn't really a match for Spike, but I still don't think he'd be as bad to deal with, since Jerry isn't as dependent on Spike to get out of a jam as Marina is with Sharko. Which is not to say he won't give him any trouble, but I don't think Spike would really be able to do much worse than what Zig already takes on a regular basis from Sharko. And speaking of which, Zig may typically be a punching bag, but his rivalry with Sharko isn't really as one-sided as you say, as there were times where Zig has been able to fight against him and even get the upper hand. So same could likely apply for Spike here. Again, not saying he's actually comparable for obvious reasons, but goes to show that he's not the pushover you say he is. And touching on Tom being able to call for backup with other cats, I don't think that'd be too reliable either. Because for one, it's pretty inconsistent as to whether or not Tom is actually friends with cats like Butch. Most of the time they're at odds with each other like a secondary rival, and I don't think any of them would really be able to help in taking down Sharko. They'd certainly be able to keep him more on his toes, but Sharko's also beaten up a group of hyenas similar to Zig, all of which were more competent hunters than him. So I don't think Tom's alley cat friends would really make a difference. As for Zig and Bernie, I do know Jerry's not going to automatically befriend anyone his own size, but in general he's a lot more trusting of them, so I don't think meeting one crab that's an asshole should be enough to say it's not something Bernie could take advantage of. And on a similar note, if Spike does get more involved, we've seen that he's also more trusting of other dogs than any old cat. And we know Zig can pull off a pretty convincing dog impression in spite of his wild animal heritage. So there's another thing they could potentially use to get on their good graces, especially since again, I don't think Spike would really care as much if they wanted to get rid of Jerry so long as he's not disturbed. At least not as much as Sharko would care about Marina getting kidnapped, whether it's a part of his daily routine or not. And speaking of which, yeah, Tom and Jerry have been doing this shtick for way longer than Vig and Sharko have. But you neglect to mention that Tom and Jerry have also gotten through a lot of different iterations over those past 81 years. They've been ordinary suburban animals, musketeers in olden-time France, they've been around the time periods of Robin Hood and Sherlock Holmes, Tom was a weird space squid one time, and there are even versions of them that have them as friends from the start. So it feels weird to use that as a point for Tom being more determined than Vig, since we don't really know if this is all the same house cat. Vig and Sharko, meanwhile, is just one iteration that actually has a consistent setting, characters, dynamic, and even traces of continuity. Well, starting with Season 2 at least. So I think it's safe to say that Vig would be more adamant than Tom, generally speaking, looking at how he fares across these different takes on the character. So with all that said, while you argued well for your precious pussycat, I still feel like Vig will be chowing down on some tasty mouse fritters, while Tom's just going to get a fistful of cartilage in his face.
Wowee. Looks like the two of us are taking after our respective series with all this back and forth conflict.
You said it, my guy. You know how this works by now. Leave a comment or post a prediction in the Multiverse's Discord server for a chance for them to be featured in Part 2.
Also, make sure to check the description for the link to our own channels, as well as the Galaxy Video Ko-fi page.
I wish I had a cheeky quote to reference, but Zig and Sharko was a purely silent cartoon. So, yeah, see you next time.